So a few weeks ago, we just got finished having a class on Emerson's essays. And we were studying probably his best known essay called Self-Reliance. And we were taking a look at one of his most famous quotes, and that is, imitation is suicide. Now, I could do an entire talk on just that quote because it's a profound statement about how to allow and encourage ourselves to be authentic, to be who we came here to be. Because when we're not, when we're imitating somebody else, we are essentially killing off the part of us that is unique and special. Hence the phrase, imitation is suicide. However, that isn't the exact quote that I want to talk about today, because if you were in the Emerson class, you remember this. The whole time we were talking about this quote, imitation is suicide, I kept mispronouncing it. And I kept saying, limitation is suicide. And we were kind of laughing about it because it was, I was making this mistake, right? But after a while, we were all like, well, wow, that's actually pretty good too. That's that's a profound statement. That makes sense. Because if it is true that imitation is suicide, in other words, not being true to who we came here to be, then it's also true that limitation is suicide. Because when we give in to our limiting thoughts, when we give in to those beliefs that keep us stuck, when we give in to those people who are limiting us, we are essentially killing off a part of ourselves as well. Now, the reason why I say that is that in our teaching, I probably say this every single Sunday, but you know what? It's basic to our teaching. And that is, God is all there is. Say that with me. God is all there is. God is limitless potential and possibility. And because that's true, really getting that God is all there is, and that means that God is also who I am, who you are. We are made of it. Just like the poem said, we are made of it, therefore we too are spiritually filled with potential and limitless. We have the capability of doing and being anything that we set to our imagination or that we feel called to do. In reality, the only limits we have are the limits that we put on ourselves or the limits that other people put on us. Because the truth is, limits are not God-ordained. Limits are not God-ordained. They are of our own making and our own beliefs and our own acceptance of that truth. We accept that the limitations is true, therefore they are. Let me tell you what Ernest Holmes said about that. He said, there is nothing in the universe that limits you, or that would or could desire to limit you. There is nothing in the universe that withholds from you, because in so doing, it would withhold from itself. Everybody go like this, oh my God! I'm right? You are some part of its purpose. The Spirit seeks, urges, pushes against you to fulfill itself. However, no matter how abundantly the horn of plenty may pour out its universal gifts, there must be a bowl of acceptance, a chalice of expectancy, or the gift cannot be complete. Everybody go like this, oh my God, right? If our minds, if our thoughts, our beliefs are tied to limitation, things like, see if any of these sound familiar. I can't do this because. It's not possible because I've never been able to do that because we are not open and accepting of the limitless potential and possibility that is all around us. So the first thing we need to do is to come to terms with the idea that we do indeed live in a limitless and abundant universe, in a world of possibility. The first thing we have to accept. So when I'm doing that, when I need a reminder, I go to nature. You know that about me, I'm nature girl, right? To truly understand limitlessness, all we have to do is look at the number of trees and needles and pine cones in the one set of mountains an hour from here. I want you to think about this. We could spend our entire lives counting the needles from those pine trees, and we would never be able to do it. Because as soon as we came to the end of the pile or of the grouping of needles that we started counting, there would be a gazillion more that started while we started counting. Does that make sense? Really? Let me give you another example. This is the one that I use for myself. Many of you know I have two cats. Their names are George and Lucy. And I swear to God that I pick up more cat hair every day. I could knit myself a new cat every single day. And they are not bald. And there is always more hair to pick up every day. It is unending. And if that's not proof enough, go outside and look at the stars. Go look at the sand on the beach, any beach. Look at the cells in our bodies. Look at the ants that invade Southern California in the summertime. Or look at the snow on the ground in Calgary. The list of nature's limitlessness is limitless. You got that? Everybody okay? So, as good as that is, I mean, it's like, okay, I have this big picture now. It's kind of esoteric. It's kind of out there. What about bringing it down to a human level? Because after all, we are human. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. But the fact is, we are having a human experience. So how can we learn to go beyond the limits of our human perceptions and our human experiences? Well, the truth is, we're doing it all the time. We just don't know that we're doing it. We're doing it as humans. We're doing it as the human race. We just don't see us going beyond the limits. We just call it living our lives. So to put it into perspective for you, think back to 100 years ago, okay? Some of you may have even been there. Okay, none of you. All right. Think back to the things that we take for granted in 2014 that were completely unthought of in 1914. Just the technological breakthroughs alone is enough to blow your mind. Think about that 100 years ago. It started with this radical concept of, radio and, moving pictures. And now we have the internet, we have cell phones, we have satellites, we've got robots. Don't you think the people of the early days back then would be absolutely amazed by the things that we have that we take for granted, we don't even think about? They would say that we had broken through limits, that we had gone beyond limits they couldn't even imagine, except for maybe some of the scientific writers or the science fiction writers back then. What about the social changes of 100 years ago? Women's rights, civil rights for blacks, so much so that the U.S. has a black president. The civil rights was in 1960s. And in the 2000s, there was a black U.S. president. Oh my gosh. Think about marriage equality. The things that we are starting to take for granted here. Just as an acknowledgement of first rights of First Nations people. Think about the limits that women and people of color and gay people had to deal with just 100 years ago. Moving beyond those limits would have been thought to be impossible. And they were, until they weren't anymore. Right? One of the most famous quotes by Ernest Holmes is, "Principle is not bound by precedent." In other words, just because something has always been a certain way, doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Or just because something has never been a certain way, doesn't mean that it can't. Just ask Barack Obama. Just ask any woman who votes. Because it's true for society, and it is true for us as individuals as well. We just have to know it. We just have to believe it. Because when we can understand this, that principle with a capital P, meaning God, principle is not bound by precedent, then we have the key to working beyond those limitations that we are experiencing that are keeping us stuck. For instance, the internet is filled with inspiring stories about people who've gone beyond their limits and achieved great things. Think about this. Remember, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago when a very, very plain, painfully shy woman by the name of Susan Boyle stood up on a stage in Britain's Got Talent and delivered a song that made everyone's jaws drop. Now her looks and her mild manner could have held her back, but not the divine within her. That voice and that story had to be known, and it inspired millions of people. We're thrilled when we watch a disabled person who is able to do great things in spite of their perceived limitations. They exemplify, as Dr. Holmes said, that the spirit within is seeking and urging and pushing against them to fulfill itself. So how come them and not us? How come them and not us? For one thing, a lot of people don't know that they can go beyond their limits. How many times have you heard somebody say, or how many times have you said, "I can't help it. I was born this way," or "things just don't turn out for me," or "I never," or "I always." What those are belief systems. And because they're belief systems, it's what they experience. Because they don't know that principle is not bound by precedent. They don't know that they can move beyond those old beliefs and get themselves unstuck. But because we know it, say that with me, principle is not bound by precedent. Pretty good, eh? That was pretty good. When we know that, we can open ourselves up to a new idea, to a new way of being, to a new way of thinking, because spirit within you is seeking and urging and pushing against you to fulfill itself. No one else can express it in the way that you can. This is so important. Ernest Holmes said there is an inner urge in our minds to grow, to expand, to break down the barriers of previous limitations, and to ever widen our experience. This persistent urge is a divine influence, an irresistible force, and constitutes the greatest impulse in human experience. There is an inner urge in our minds to grow, to expand, to break down barriers. Everybody go like this. So how do we do that? How do we take what we're learning today and put it into practice? Well, you know, I'm teaching a practitioner class right now. Wonderful, wonderful students, 8 very, very committed students. And this is part of our assignment this past week, and it coincided with what I was talking about. So here you go. Here are a few questions for you to think about this week. What is being asked of you? In other words, what unique thing is Spirit wanting to know by means of you? What is that inner urge? What is that thing that is tapping at the walls of your heart? Tune into that thing, and all limitations and barriers and blocks begin to disappear. So often, we take on something that we think maybe we want to do, or maybe somebody else is telling us to do it, and we run into all these obstacles after obstacles after obstacles. Maybe it's true that it isn't ours to do. Have you ever had that experience? But maybe that when you are doing that thing that comes so naturally to you, that you know it is yours to do. You don't experience limits along the way. The pathway becomes clear because you are doing your thing. So in order to do your thing in that way, here's the second question. Are you willing to question your long-held beliefs? Are you willing to question those things that you have been telling yourself for a really long time? And if you want to know what those questions are, if you want to know what those beliefs are, they start with this: I never, I always, I can't, it doesn't, and my favorite, you don't understand. When you come up with those belief systems and you recognize it, you're saying, you know what, I never, da la la, or I always, da la la. Stop. Ask yourself, is that true? With what you know about the universe now, is that belief system true? It may be true in your life, but is it true? Because when you examine and look at these long-held beliefs with an eye to skepticism, is that true? When you look at it honestly, you begin to realize that they're only true in your own mind. Because plenty of people have achieved and worked through bigger limits, worse belief systems than you. So why not you? I love this quote by Richard Bach. Argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they're yours.
That's good.
And you know what I'm talking about, right? So here's the next one. Are you willing to do the work necessary to change your beliefs? Ooh, wait a minute, you mean I have to do work? Are you willing to see things differently? Are you willing to try things, to let go of the things that are no longer serving you? They tell us in the 12-step program that willingness is one of the first things you need to achieve to bring about change, being willing. Because willingness tells the universe and your own consciousness that you are ready to have things be different and to go beyond those limits. Willingness. Are you willing to do the work necessary. And then finally, this is the reward question. If there were no limitations, what would you do? If there were no limitations, what would you do? Allow yourself to start to dream that idea and think about how your life would look. And if you could let go of those self-imposed limits, what would your life look like? We've been discussing this all morning. The spiritual truth is you and I are limitless. We are made of God's stuff. We have all the potential and all the possibilities of the universe, and it is available to us. It's just waiting in the wings. It's vamping. It's just like, ready. Okay, I'm ready. When you're ready, I'm ready to come in. So imagine, let yourselves think about and see what your life would look like without limits. What would you embrace? Ooh. What would you do? How would you live? And once you've considered these questions, and you've opened yourself up to the possibility, the potential of moving beyond limits, then all you need to do is keep moving forward. Let me tell you what I mean by that. A lot of times we're like, I gotta do something, because I'm asking, what would you do? What would you do? I've gotta do something, I've gotta take action. And yes, it's true. We say, move your feet. We have to be in motion. Spirit can't do for us if we're sitting there in a lotus position 24 hours a day. We have to be moving forward and living our lives, but we don't have to necessarily make all the changes. All we have to do is have the awareness that our limits are self-limiting, are self-imposed. And then what happens is our consciousness expands, and then opportunities come in, and people come in, and ideas come in that allow us to continue to move forward into this life of limitlessness. In other words, our path becomes illumined once we become aware of it, and then we can see how to actually move beyond our limits. That make sense? Yeah. I want to leave you with a quote by Sharon Salzberg. She says here, it doesn't matter how long we may have been stuck in a sense of our limitations. If we go into a darkened room and turn on the light, it doesn't matter if the room has been dark for a day, a week, or 10,000 years. We turn on the light and it is illuminated. So I'm willing to give this a try. Anybody else?